Welcome back to Way of the Wrench, and on today's very special episode, I'm going to be showing you how to change drum brakes. Now, I have been doing this for about 28 years, and I have learned lots of tips and tricks and experience that I have honed over the years, and I've learned from some great people that before me that have had 30, 40 years of wrenching on drum brakes. So if you stick with me right to the end of the video, I guarantee you will be able to change your drum brakes confidently, safely, and you're going to learn a lot of stuff. So let's get going. So for today's video, I'm going to be teaching you how to do drum brake replacement on a 1999 Chevy Cavalier. But it's important to know that this is not going to be 100% exactly the same as your vehicle, as the different manufacturers are all a little bit different. However, if you understand what we're doing today, it's not going to be that much of a stretch to figure it out on yours. Think like 95% of it will be exactly the same, maybe just some slight different kind of linkages and clips and springs. And I will make note of that as we go through this, the different variations that you might see. Now for today's video, I have stolen the entire rear parking brake setup out of a vehicle because I am an automotive teacher and I can't have cars sitting around. So I've made a nice station for my students to learn on, so I'm going to be using this to teach you guys. Now the things that are missing from this tutorial would be how to jack up the car. So I will put a link up above so that you can get that video. And then once you've got the car jacked up, you take the wheel off. And then the only other thing that's missing from this station, just to keep things straight for you guys, is the wheel lug nut studs that are sticking out here are missing. So otherwise, everything else is exactly the same underneath. So before you go start buying parts and tackling this job, you should have done an inspection. And if you don't know what I'm talking about and you need some more info, I'll put a link up to the video for that. And I will be showing you exactly how to inspect everything in here so that you know if you need to even do the job and what parts you need to replace. And I also give you some great info on how to inspect your wheel cylinder to make sure that it's not leaking and needing replaced, because that would be the time to do that as well. And the big part, really in my mind, the huge part of doing this job is getting this drum off. So if you don't know how to do that and you're having trouble with the drums, I got a great bunch of tips and tricks in there to be able to get that drum off, so go watch that. Right, before we get started, we're gonna need some tools and equipment. So we're gonna need a drum brake caliper, brake spring pliers, a brake shoe hold down spring remover, flat screwdriver, pair of vice grips, wire brush, can of brake cleaner. You're going to need silicone grease. I get the Sil Glide stuff because it's heat resistant, but you can get away from that and use anti-seize as well, but I prefer the Sil Glide. And for getting pesky drums off, you're going to need a wooden mallet. And of course, our new brake drum parts. So depending on your situation and what you find during your inspection, you're going to have 2 drums, a left and right set of brake shoes, and of course your drum brake spring hardware kit. Once you got the vehicle jacked up and the wheels removed and the drum off, you're gonna see all this stuff. Now, my very first tip for you is take a picture, take a 10-20 second video with your cell phone, and do not take the other side apart. Do one side at a time, and both of those tips are going to be able to make it sure that you can get this together properly, because you'll have reference with your phone or the other side. Just remember that when you look at the other side, sometimes the stuff is reversed. And another thing is there are a couple parts that are left and right hand specific, and you don't want them mixed up. So there's another reason why you don't want to take both apart and put all the parts on one table. Before you start taking off any of the springs, you're going to want to put yourself on a pair of safety glasses, because the force and tension on those springs, when they come off, they shoot off randomly and can twang, take out an eyeball. So put them on. Now, when you open this area up, it's going to be really dusty, and it may or may not contain asbestos in that dust. So before we start anything, get your can of brake cleaner and give it a good spray down. Right, so the very first thing you're going to do is you're going to take your brake spring pliers, and on the end here is a little hole with kind of a little wheel off to the side. This hole is going to go over top of this anchor pin at the top, and this little spooled wheel at the side is going to grab the edge of your hook on the spring for your upper return springs, and you're going to twist the end of the hook off of the pin. Okay, that's the first one, and it kind of just goes down and turn it a little bit to get that one out. Then you take off the other one. All right, now there's this little actuating link in this setup, so if you can just squish this to make a little room, unhook it, and then that comes off. Okay, and the next thing, you can kind of pull a little bit on the shoes outward. You can get this parking brake link out and watch where the spring is and make a note of which way it goes. Another little tip to help you put the stuff back together is as you take stuff off, just kind of put it down in the order that you did and where it goes roughly and the right orientation so that you'll know where these things go when you're putting it back together. Okay, the next job is taking off these brake shoe hold down springs. There's one here and one here. So what we have to do is push down with our hold down spring remover tool, put our finger on the back of the pin, on the back side of the backing plate. And when you push down, all you gotta do is spin this 90 degrees and then relax, and it'll allow that retainer to line up the slot with the edge of the pin, and then that'll come off. So like this. And then pull the pin out through the back. So you can see that there's kind of like a spade end on the end of the pin, and then there's a slot. So when this is lined up, it allows it to go in and out, but when it's installed, this has been turned 90, and that's what's not letting it come apart. So when you're pushing down on the spring and turning the tool, you're trying to line up that pin in the slot so it can come out. Okay, on the other side here, we can kind of scoot this spring out here so we don't lose it. And if you don't have one of these hold down spring removers, you can do the job with a pair of pliers or vice grips as well. You're essentially just grabbing the outside of the retainer and spinning it 90 when you push down. So put the pliers on, push down, turn it 90 degrees, line up the slot in the pin, and allow it to come off. Now take the pin out. Now on this side, you'll notice it's just a touch different. So there's your retainer, there's your spring, and there's a little cup for the spring coil to kind of sit in. And this allows this linkage to kind of be centered on that hole. It acts like a pivot. So just make note of that and put that together. Okay, and then the last thing you got to do is take this lower return spring out and this. However, because we started from the top to the bottom, it's really quite easy. We can literally pull this apart and off, and you'll notice in this case there is a lever here that's kind of got a hook into the emergency parking brake cable. So there's just a little hook, so you just got to turn it and twist it, and then this can come off the vehicle like this. Now you can take out your star wheel adjuster, and then the spring will come out as well. Now at this point here, if you were doing an emergency parking brake cable replacement, you would do that now, or if you were doing a wheel cylinder replacement, you would do it now as well. And in fact, when I make each of those videos in the future, I will refer you back to this video so that you can get to that point and how to put it back together when you're done. Now at this point, you can really clearly see the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 contact patches where the back metal part of the shoe ride against. So we need to make sure that they don't have any issues. So you can get yourself a little wire brush and give them a little scrub. Make sure they're nice and clean. Maybe another hit with brake cleaner just to make sure they're good. All the old stuff's off. Now, to prevent any kind of weird chirping at low speeds when you come to a stop, anything metal to metal needs a little bit of lubrication. Now, we don't want to goop it on here so that it drips off and contaminates our brakes. So we just need them a thin coat. So I'm going to use my Sil Glide here. And like I said, just a very thin coat. There should be no extra blobs. And as you're doing this, if that surface of those contact pads feel a little rough, or there's a lip or anything like that, you're going to have to kind of sand that smooth. If it's a really old car and it's been on there for a long time, it's quite possible they've even rubbed right through, which would probably require a new backing plate, or at a minimum, you could probably MIG weld that up and then grind it down to the same level. But in most people's cases, you're going to be replacing a backing plate. Okay, other metal to metal contact areas are going to be on the back here, just a little bit for where the shoes contact. You could put a touch right here on the end of the pins for your wheel cylinder. Basically anything metal on metal, key thing, just a light film. And once again, I'm using Sil Glide, that's silicone grease that does not melt at high temperatures, so you won't have the grease come off and contaminate your brakes. Now, once you've done that, it's a good idea to go wash your hands. Make sure you don't have any grease on your hands before you start touching your new brake shoes. Next step is take a look at your star wheel adjuster. Make sure that these little spurs on this kind of gear looking thing look okay. It's not worn out. And then we're going to take this apart. So this should just pull off. And this part, we're going to spin it all the way out to expose all the threads. And if this is really, really gross, you're going to want to take a wire brush and you're going to clean these threads absolutely clean. Clean any corrosion, rust in here. Give this a shot of brake clean, especially down in the hole. Get it all nice and clean. And then before we put this back together, we want this self-adjusting mechanism to work long term. So what we're going to do is we are going to lubricate these threads. So get yourself some Never Seas. And not only will this lubricate, it'll kind of prevent this thing from rusting and kind of sticking together, not working properly. And we don't want a ton on here, just a nice thin coat. And then on this very end here, you can either just put some Never Seas or a little bit of silicone grease. And then you're putting it back together. And for those of you working in a shop, if you don't want to use this, you can take it over to the wire wheel. That does a nice quick job of that as well. And to make this easy to go in with the next parts, we're going to put this all the way in. Okay, and then this just simply goes on like that, and we're ready to go. All right, so taking a look at our new shoes here, we've got 4 here, so this is a complete set, so left and rights. And in some cases, each of these are exactly the same. There is no difference between them. And sometimes they are side specific. So you might find that the shoes are shorter or longer. It just depends on what your setup is. Now in this case, they are exactly all the same. So we just have to take one of these and match it up. So line it up like that. Besides there being more friction material, it's the same length. Looking at the holes and the kind of contour details, this is exactly the same. Upon further inspection, if I take a look at the shoes and you can see that there's a curve on both sides here, I'll put those on both on one end. And if I line up the linings and the shoe lengths on one end and I go to the other side, you can see that the one on the right is a little bit longer. So this is going to be my trailing shoe. So this has to go to the back of the vehicle. This is going to the front of the vehicle when you're using the setup. So they aren't all the same. So this is something you're going to have to note when you put your drum brakes together. Now, one of the things that you don't get with your new shoes is you don't get one of these levers for your emergency park cable, and you're not going to get a pin. Sometimes you'll get a pin, sometimes you'll get the little clip, but realistically, if this one's working okay, you can reuse it. If it's looking gross, you're going to have to order these parts separately. So one thing we have to do is transfer these over. So usually there's some kind of C circlip there. You can kind of get 2 screwdrivers and push it out, or in this case, there's a little bit of a gap on the end, so we're just going to kind of pull that out. And then once it's kind of mostly out, it comes out pretty easy. So there's our circlip. And then that comes off, and the pin is underneath. Now we want this exactly the same, so we're going to position, there's a radius here, match the radius there, and then that's the hole that they use, so we're going to put the pin back in from underneath, transfer this over, make sure that it's the same orientation, we're not switching that direction around, and then we're going to put the clip back in. And you can kind of get it started by hand, and if it gets too tight, you can just use a screwdriver from the side and just put it home there. Perfect. All right, now it's time to put everything back together, which should be pretty easy because you took a picture and you took a 10-second video clip of where everything goes, and you also didn't take the other side apart, so you can reference that if you need to. However, as we go together here, I am going to show you something that literally nobody on YouTube teaches, and it's for me, it makes sure that everything goes together properly, but it also kind of gives you a way better understanding of how the drum brakes work as we go together here. So let me show you that. Now, when I was going through automotive in high school, I had a really good teacher by the name of John Laquette, and this is one of my good memories of this guy. So this is in '95, and we didn't have cell phones and cameras in our pockets, and the internet was just starting out. So what we would do is we would lay out each corner of the station, because our stations had 4 drum brake setups. So we'd have 4 of these set up in each of the corners so that we knew the order and where things had to go. And at this point, we were told to call Mr. Laquette over. And when he'd come over and he'd see that we had done this, he'd come over and say something like, "Oh, yeah, I see you got it all apart and you got everything nicely organized. You can put it back together. That's really good. Yeah, great work, guys. All right, there you go." You do this with all 4 corners of the car. Give it a little shake. dump it all out on the table, like as we were staring at him with horrified looks, and he'd say, now let's figure this out and put it back together, and he'd walk off with a big smile. So looking at this big mess of parts, we're gonna start with figuring out where the shoes go first, because they're the biggest pieces. So when you're trying to figure this out, don't freak out and all of a sudden shut your brain off. Just kind of think of it like a logical puzzle and you will get it figured out. So the very first thing is we have a huge hint on this part. This is a curve, so it can only go like this or like that because it has to match the curve. It can't go out like this, okay? So that has narrowed it down to only 4 positions, like this, like this, like that, or like that. So what's the next hint? Well, we've got this little emergency park braking cable. So that's a huge one right there. Literally, this has to go into here like that. So that's how it goes. Now, the other kind of clues is up here on the top is kind of a curved radius, and down here is flat. And so that curve goes up to match up the curve that's at the top here, kind of like where the anchor pin is. And then this flat is where that star wheel adjuster is going to go. So we have now figured out this one goes there. And because we know about the curve and the flat on the top of the shoe, this one's got a curve at the top, so it can go like that, and that's it. So now we know where those go. Now another big hint you might have, depending on which shoes you have, is that sometimes one of the shoes has a shorter length of lining, and the other one will have a really long one. And that is your leading and trailing brake shoes. And so what's happening there is that when you're driving down the road and the drum and the wheel is spinning in this direction, when you push the brake pedal, hydraulic pressure builds up in the brake fluid here and pushes these pistons out, which forces the shoes out like this against the spinning drum. Now, because the drum is spinning this direction, it's going to want to spin these brake shoes in this direction as they grab and start kind of putting friction on. And because there's a star wheel adjuster down here, this one is going to go out and want to go this way. So that's going to push on the star wheel adjuster, which is attached to the other shoe. So it's putting way more force on that than normal. And then this one is going to want to go out and also spin, but where it's touching up here at the anchor pin, it can't move. So it kind of acts like a wedge. There's like a wedge action that happens. And so that's a servo setup when you have this one serving this other shoe to make it brake even harder. So if this one has to do a lot more braking, way more than this one, they end up putting the lining a lot longer on there so that in the end they eventually wear even, because this one has the longer lining. Now, a really easy and fun way to remember this for the long term is think of it like a mullet, right? We got business up front, party out back. So the short lining goes to the front and the long lining goes to the back. Party on. Woo! Okay, so starting from the bottom and going up, we need to know which way this star wheel adjuster goes. So we need some more info, so we're not sure. So we're looking for what engages this little spur wheel, and that's this guy here. That's this little linkage here. So we need to know where this goes. So it can't go over here because it has to have a hole that matches for the pin for it to pivot. Can't go like that. And it could go upside down, but that really doesn't make sense. Kind of, it's not really sitting flat on here. And you can kind of tell by the old previous wear marks where things would be sitting. And it won't go like that over here, but it sure can go like that. And what do you know? That star wheel, spur wheel is right where it needs to be. So we know where this goes. Now that we know that this goes like this, we have the lower return spring. And it can have a couple different placements as well. So here's our new lower return spring. It only has 4 ways of going on. It can go like this, like that, like this, or like that. Now, when you want this to move very freely and not be hindered by any movement, so if we have it like this or like that, the large diameter of this spring is going to be sitting right on top of that spur wheel, and it's not going to let itself adjust, so that won't work. So we know it's like this or like that. And same thing, if we put it like this, you can see that the part of the spring is going to stick right into that spur, not let it move. Whereas if we go like this, that clears that and lets that move freely. So now we have figured out where that goes. So the easiest way to get this to go on is put on whatever is harder to put on first and put the lower return spring in, and then put that end of the star wheel adjuster in, and then all you got to do is kind of pull the springs a little bit and then put put that end in, and this will kind of hold itself together so that you can go put it onto the actual backing plate. All right, when you go to put this on, remember to put the little hook for the emergency parking brake cable. Put it in to the end there, and get that sitting up at the top, and then that one over here. Now, it'll kind of hold itself and not fall on you so that you can get the next step in. Okay, so this doesn't completely fall apart on us. We're going to put down one of the hold down springs, so match up your springs, get a new retainer, get a new pin, and insert the pin from the back, line it up with the one hole, and line up the end of the pin so that it has the same kind of orientation as the slot. Put your hold down spring remover tool on it and push down the spring and line it up. Once you got it passed, turn it 90, let it go, make sure it's sitting in the right spot. There we go. All right, next up is our emergency parking brake link, and once again we have kind of another puzzle here. This could go like this, like that, or like that. So we need some more info. So if you notice on one side here, there's just one kind of groove, so it can go on kind of one piece, and there's a little bit of a ledge on either side here. So that's kind of obvious that this spring is going to go there. Okay, and then on this end, we've kind of got two grooves, almost like one next to each other, and one goes deeper than the other, almost like it goes over two things, and one has to sit a bit deeper. So if you take a look at here, what do you know? We got two things, and this side is sticking down lower, and this side goes further out. So the deeper groove has got to accommodate for that. So now we know that this goes like this. So all we got to do is push this end in. And because we have no hold down spring on this side, you can kind of gently pry it out. Put that over the two spots. And there you go, that's figured out now. Okay, and then we got the hold down spring on this side. So remember, we've got the star wheel adjuster lever here. We've got the little pivot pin that this sits in and sits in that hole to allow it to pivot. Then we got the spring, then the retainer. Put the pin in from the back side. Put your finger on the back of the pin, make sure that it's straight and not kind of hanging down and crooked, otherwise you're not going to have enough room on the end of the pin to get this all in. And make sure this isn't sitting up on the star wheel adjuster, kind of adding, shortening the length of the pin kind of. And then put it on like the other side. So line up the slot with your pin, turn it 90, check that it's sitting in there, not going to come out. Okay, don't forget about this little spring, and if you don't know which way it goes, just take a look at it, right? So there's a little kind of square pin here. That fits in here, but if you had it the other way, that pin would be kind of all over the place, and this would probably just fall out. So that's an easy one to figure out. Just compress it a little bit. There we go. Okay, and then we've got the first thing is this link here, and you can see that it's got a nice big hook to go around there, and this end doesn't actually fit. And so if this goes like this, kind of doesn't sit flat or right, so that has to sit like this. And then this little end goes in that little hook. So you just got to compress the spring, give it a little bit of room. Probably put it on here first, and then you can compress it and slide it on the top. And then last thing is the upper return springs. So on your brake spring pliers, on the end is kind of a little hook. And that hook is going to allow you to kind of grab the edge of the anchor pin once you have a spring on here. And you're just going to lever it on, and it'll kind of slide down the end and go on to here. Now, sometimes there's multiple holes here. So if you've got, like for example, right here, this is a good example. If I don't know which one, just try one. Put it in, spin it, and you'll notice that this spring ain't going to do anything. It's actually too far this way, so that's not the hole. But there is another one behind it, which is further away. So put it in the hole. Give it a little spin, and now you can see I got to stretch the spring, which is what we want. We want to pull these shoes in. So put the end of the lever like that, put the end of the brake spring pliers on the end of the anchor pin, and simply just kind of ride it up, twist it to the side, and then that'll go on. Now, if you don't have the brake spring pliers, you can do this job with this, but man, there's something to be said about using the right tool for the right job, but it can be done. So we'll do the other side, same thing. Stick it in, give it a little spin, like that. Take your flat screwdriver, Put the spring on there like that, and then the trick is you just have to kind of keep it so that it's balanced so it doesn't just go off to the side. And slide it up over like that. So it can be done. I just honestly use the right tool for the job. That's what it's all about. Now it should be noted that if you were to take left and right sides apart and happen to get the parts mixed up, these star wheel adjusters are left and right hand specific. And so that what that means is the threads on one of them is going to be normal threads, right hand threads. The other one is going to be left hand threads, so that the action when you go in reverse and put on the brakes, it's going to spin this a certain way, which will make it extend out. We always want this extending out if there's enough room for it to do that, so that it's always staying close to the drum. If you get these mixed up, every time you do that adjusting mechanism, it's actually going to shrink this, which is going to bring them away from your drums, and then you're going to have some issues. Now, way to check that is, remember, this only actually operates when we're going in reverse. So if the drum is going this way when we go forward, that means the drum is going this way when we're going reverse. And when you put on the brakes, these shoes are going to extend out, grab the inside of the drum, and want to rotate this way. Okay, and if there's enough room in here, because these are worn out and this needs to actually be adjusted, what's going to happen is as this moves, this hard steel link is not going to move. It's not going to let it move. So it's going to end up pulling on this side of the lever here. And what that's going to do is it's going to make it go like this. So if I simulate that, it'll go down. And then when you stop and go forward, it will come back because of this spring here. Now, if there isn't enough room for it to move out, what will happen is this lever will go part way over a tooth, but just come back. It won't actually travel enough to go under a tooth and have it come back up, which engages at one tooth. So if there is enough clearance, though, that's what it'll do. It'll go down below a tooth, and then when you go forward, the spring's going to push it back up, and it will rotate just a touch, one tooth. So a way to check if you got this right for the left hand and right hand is just operate this a bunch and figure out which way it would go. So it would go this way with the star wheel. So now you can pull this to the side and just start spinning it. And if you notice that this gap is getting bigger, that's what we want. This is on the correct side. All right, once you got this all together, sometimes the parts are not kind of sitting exactly where they're supposed to, or they're off center, and it can make it hard. So here's a little trick. You can give it a kind of little knock around, and it'll help settle and make sure everything's kind of sitting in the right spot. Something like this. All right, now depending what you found during your brake drum inspection, you may be able to use your old drum, or you may be using a new drum. So if you are going to plan on using your old drum, here's some things you need to look at. So the very first thing you would have checked, it would have been during your inspection, is measuring the inside diameter of this and making sure it is not bigger than the number that's stamped on the outside of the drum. So this one's 201.4. That's the throwaway dimension. So you're going to take your drum brake caliper, undo the knob, put it down into it, and you want to get the perfect kind of tangent size of the circle, and you can't have this sitting crooked, otherwise you'll get kind of a weird number 2. So what I do is I pull these apart, and I go back and forth to make sure that I find the biggest the circle could be, make sure it's sitting parallel, and with this hand I pinch to keep it in its position while I lock the nut here, then pull it out. And right here, next to this white piece of plastic, tells you what the size is. So in this case, this is 200.5 millimeters. So that is less than 201.4. So this could be used technically based off of just the size alone. Now, after you've done that, you're also going to look at some other things here. So look at the surface here where the brake shoes contact. It should look shiny. There shouldn't be any deep grooves, there shouldn't be any cracks in it, there should not be any kind of heat checking where there's different colors like browns and purples and blues in here in the shiny surface. That's indicating that there's been some heat issues. And no heavy lip on the edge here where the shoes don't actually get out to. If there's a huge lip there, then that probably shouldn't be used again. Or at a minimum, this needs to go on a brake lathe to get machined down, and look forward to a video from me near in the future for that. So in this case, this drum is usable. It looks okay, measures out okay. Now, the one thing you do want to do though, if you're going to reuse a drum, is that we have to kind of get the old brake friction material off and leave a nice surface here for the new shoes to kind of bed in properly. So what I recommend is about 180 to 220 grit sandpaper, and you're going to scuff up these surfaces until they're not shiny. They just look a little bit dull. And you don't want to scratch in the direction that those shoes are going to be polishing. You kind of want to go 90 to that, or at least kind of a crosshatch kind of pattern, something like this. And you'll know you're done when the shine is gone and it's kind of got a dull kind of look to it. That's all you need to do. You're going to do that all the way around the drum. And when you're doing that, if there's a tiny lip on the edge here, you can take some more aggressive sandpaper and just sand that lip down. That way that lip doesn't get even bigger, and the next time you go to do this job, you can't get the drums off because they're embedded in that groove. And one last thing, if you're going to reuse a drum, if you or the driver is complaining about having kind of pulsing brakes at low speed stops, or whenever they're on the brakes, there's a shudder and a shake to the vehicle, and when they let off the brakes, there's nothing, that's a very big indicator that you've got either warped rotors or warped brake drums. So if you ignore that and you put this drum back on with your new shoes, you may have that problem still. So one thing you can do to check this out before you start the job is all of the rear brakes that are usually drums on vehicles nowadays are going to be with the parking brake. So when you operate the parking brake, you're only using the rear brakes. So what you can do is find a parking lot or a quiet empty street and do some light speed stops and slow downs with your parking brake only. And all you are doing is testing the drum brakes. So if there is a shudder and some sounds, but it goes away as soon as you take the parking brake off, then chances are you've got a warped drum. If you can brake fine and it's nice and smooth and nice and quiet, then you don't have a warped drum. Now for this video, we're going to put in some new drums here. So we need to use our drum brake caliper and measure the inside of this one. So once again, pull the sides apart, find the biggest diameter, make sure it's nice and parallel, pinch your hand, lock the nut. Okay, now we don't even need to look at the size, but it is like 200 mil, just a touch over. So that's a good diameter, which we would expect because it's a new one. And for whatever reason, this is a really cheap drum. It doesn't even have that number stamped on the outside. So if you want to engrave that on the other side, that'd probably be a good idea. Off the other drums, you have that info. And then the cool thing about this tool is that now that we've measured the inside, it automatically sets these outside caliper jaws to the exact setting. So let me show you what we're going to use that for. So one of the last things we need to do is adjust the star wheel adjuster so that the edges of these shoes are not touching the inside of the drum, but very, very close. So that way when you push the brake pedal or operate the emergency parking brake, these are ready to touch in instant action. Now, a lot of YouTubers will teach that you put the drum on and you kind of spin it and you go by feel. I really don't like that method because there's room for error. And what happens is you drive 5-10 blocks from the shop after doing this and you are smelling burning metal, and all of a sudden your rear brakes are locking up, and that's because you had these too far out. So what we do is, because we use this tool and measured the exact dimension of the drum, this tool sets the outside dimension here to the exact same amount. So what I'm going to get you to do is put this jaw against the edge of one shoe, and then over here you're going to see the clearance between the two. And what we're shooting for is 1 millimeter of clearance. So that way when we're all said and done, each side will be about 0.5 away, and that's really nice and close. Now it's not going to be there because we adjusted the star wheel all the way in to make it the smallest. So then what you're going to do is grab your screwdriver, and we know that going this direction is going to make it expand. So just go a couple clicks at a time. Recheck with the tool, and as soon as you got your 1 mil clearance, you're good to go. Once you've got this set up with that 1 mil clearance, time to put the drum on and check it for kind of clearance fits. So line up your studs with the holes. Should just slide on like that. You shouldn't have to hammer it on at all. And when it's sitting on a wheel bearing hub assembly with the studs in here, you should be able to spin it as well. Should have no binding, no issues as well. Okay, once it's all together, you should be able to operate the parking brake just to check that it functions and works okay. So you should see that the shoes are expanding out, and when you let go, it springs back. Cycle that a couple times, make sure that's working okay. It's a great way of checking your parking brake cable, whether it's working, and allowing it to come back as well. Also put the drum on and put the parking brake on, and then you should not be able to spin it. So that's working properly as well. And then the last thing we're going to do is we're going to clean out the inside of the drum with some brake cleaner, and you can hit the outside surfaces of your shoes. Just watch that you're not spraying and wiping off all the silicone grease that we put in other areas. So you're not doing the whole thing, just the shoe linings. And realistically, there should be no grease or silicone grease on there because we washed our hands after we applied that stuff. Give it a final once over too. It's not a bad idea. Double check your work, make sure everything's in. Something's not just about ready to fall off. And then put the drum back on. Put your wheel back on. Make sure you torque your wheels up to the proper torque spec for your vehicle. And you should be checking them in about 100K or a week's time so that if any of them loosened up, you can recheck them again then. Now that you've got one side done, go ahead and do the other side, and you're gonna be amazed at how much faster you're gonna be because now you know what you're doing. Now, once you've done both sides and you're staring at a bag of extra parts, don't freak out too much because it's often that they give you extra stuff because this kit is designed for multiple vehicles. And in your case, you don't actually need the springs. And in this case, this one actually even says to discard the remaining parts and only replace the springs and pins with similar size stuff from what you've removed. Now, more because someone's going to ask me why I didn't talk about it, this side of the brake spring pliers is for installing springs. And the idea is that one end's got a hook so that you can put it onto the hook of the spring. And then the other end goes into one of the holes where the riveted on friction lining is. And that'll hold its position so you can stretch the spring to take it on and off. However, I don't like using that because sometimes the lining can actually get damaged and even come off in a chunk if you're not grabbing in the right spot. And a lot of the linings nowadays don't have rivets, they're bonded, so there is no hole and you can't use this without damaging it. Now that the wheels are back on and torqued to proper specs and the vehicle's down on the ground, before you move the vehicle, you really should check your brakes. So put your foot on the brake pedal, should feel firm and it should be up at the top of its movement, and also check your parking brake function. So pull up on the lever with about 40-50 pounds of force, should feel about 3 to 5 clicks, or roughly about a third of the travel, and start to feel tight. And when you just start to get the vehicle moving a little bit on the way out of the shop, also check it again to make sure that both your brakes and your parking brake works. And that way you know you got some brakes when you're taking off and going down the road. All right, then the last suggestion I have for you is that anytime you do a disc brake or drum brake replacement, you should always do a proper bed-in procedure. Now, this video is getting really long, so I'm gonna make a how to bed in your brakes video, so stay tuned for that. But in a nutshell, what we're trying to do is make sure that the friction material surfaces are matched to the inside of the drum. And we also want to apply a very even coat of our friction material to our new metal components. So that way we don't have any kind of vibrations or poor brake performance, and we get the maximum brakes that we want from our new setup. So stay tuned for that. Okay, just to nail down what we learned today, this is from a 1968 Pontiac Parisienne, and it is its front brakes. So there's very similar stuff and some differences. So there's no parking brake linkage and stuff like that, but we've got our upper return springs, hold down springs, lower return spring, star wheel adjuster. There's a little spring to bring it back. The only thing different is we've got an extra spring on here to another little plate that the actuator link up here attaches to. So that's really the only difference. The other thing that we could see here is this is the rear of the vehicle. So there is the longer lining that has to go to the back and the shorter up there. So you can see it's very similar. And then here's another example. This is from like a mid-1980s GMC panel van, and it's exactly the same setup as what we just did. And right up here, this is about the only difference. We've got like an anchor pin washer up here, or an anchor pin plate, just to keep the springs away from the shoes from rubbing. And otherwise, everything's exactly the same. Okay, on some drum brake setups, instead of having a hard wire for an actuator link for our star wheel adjuster, they may have a cable that kind of gets routed around the corner with a little sheet metal kind of guide. And then the end of the wire has kind of a loop that you put over the anchor pin. And then it attaches much the same to the actuator link, and it acts the same because that cable isn't going to stretch. But otherwise everything else is the same. On some drum brakes, you might actually not see a coil spring used as a hold down spring, so don't be thrown off by that. Sometimes they use these kind of like U-shaped kind of sheet metal looking things. that spring steel, and it does the same exact purpose. The only difference is instead of having a separate retainer, the retainer section is actually built right into that spring clip. And on some drum brake setups, you are not going to have the star wheel adjuster opposite from the anchor pin. You're going to find two big rivets or additional anchor pins at the bottom instead. And what they do there is, instead of having the emergency parking brake link, the link is going to be now the star wheel adjuster, and there will be slightly different spring setups to operate that so that it functions the same manner. These type of setups are called non-servo drum brakes. So because of the anchor pins at the bottom, we can't get that serving action where the leading shoe can help wedge and push even harder on the trailing shoe to get even better braking. And for some of you that are thinking, man, what is he talking about drum brakes in the year 2024? Well, there's still cars that are coming out that have four-wheel disc brakes, but the rear parking brake is inside one of the rotors. So those setups, they look exactly the same as drum brakes, so you should be able to figure those out as well. It's a wrap in another video from Way of the Wrench, this time on drum brake replacements. If you have any questions, you can put it down below and I'll get back to you as soon as possible. And hey, if I was able to help you out, maybe you could help me out. I would love it if you could share out my channel on your social media, so that way I can help more people. And man, maybe I saved you a ton of money and really helped you out. Maybe check out my Patreon, links down below. Future videos, I've got a brake lathe and maybe you do too and you're not sure how to use it, so I'm going to make a video or two on how to machine drums and discs for you. And if you haven't already, why don't you join us on Instagram, Way of the Wrench. Until next time, take it easy.